This parking lot is under HOA authority. Remove your car now, even if you're the father.
The church parking lot looked like every other peaceful Sunday scene people expect without even thinking about it. Minivans rolled in slow, sedans eased into open spots, and a couple of pickup trucks lined the far edge like they always did. The bells from inside the church chimed softly, not loud enough to rush anyone, just enough to remind folks why they were there. Families stepped out smiling, parents fixing collars, kids hopping over invisible cracks in the pavement like it was a game. Elderly couples walked arm in arm, nodding at familiar faces, and volunteers near the entrance handed out warm greetings like it was second nature. The whole place had that calm, respectful vibe where nobody honks, nobody yells, and everybody seems to move at half speed on purpose. It was clear to anyone with eyes that this was church property, not some shared subdivision space or neighborhood cut-through. The parking lot wrapped directly around the building with signs about services and community events, not HOA notices or speed limit warnings. The lines were a little faded, the asphalt patched in places, and the whole thing screamed private religious grounds, not planned community infrastructure. People parked where they always had, some a little crooked, some too close to the curb, but nobody cared because this wasn't a place built for rules enforcement. It was built for people to show up as they were, grab a seat and breathe for an hour. That's when the woman in the pink blazer stood out, even before anyone really clocked why. She wasn't greeting anyone, wasn't carrying a Bible, and wasn't headed toward the doors. She stood near the entrance of the parking lot, slightly off to the side, holding a clipboard flat against her chest like it meant something. The blazer was bright enough to catch the eye without being flashy, the kind of thing someone wears when they want to look official without wearing a uniform. Her hair was set just right, her posture stiff, and her eyes tracked every car like she was counting beats in her head. Nobody heard her say a word at first because she didn't. She just watched. She glanced at tires crossing the painted lines, watched brake lights flick on and off, and shifted her weight each time someone parked a little too far from where she expected. The clipboard stayed tucked under her arm, untouched but ready. From a distance, she could have passed for a volunteer or maybe someone helping manage overflow parking. That assumption bought her time. People naturally trust anyone who looks like they know what they're doing, especially on a quiet Sunday morning. The narrator clocks it immediately though. She doesn't belong to this place and she definitely doesn't have authority here. No badge, no vest, no church lanyard, nothing tying her to the building behind her. Just a clipboard and confidence, which is usually enough to slide past questions for a few minutes. Folks waved politely as they passed her, some even nodded like she was doing them a favor. One guy slowed down and rolled his window halfway, clearly expecting directions, but she didn't speak so he shrugged and parked where he always did. People assumed she was helping because she looked official, plain and simple. In America, a clipboard might as well be a hall pass. If someone's holding one and standing in the right spot, most folks won't challenge it. They're thinking about getting inside, finding a seat, making sure they're not late. Nobody wants to kick off their Sunday with drama over parking lines. So the crowd kept flowing, calm and unaware, while she stayed planted like a checkpoint nobody asked for. A breeze moved through the lot, rustling coats and carrying the sound of laughter from a group of kids racing each other toward the doors. The woman in pink watched them too, her eyes narrowing slightly when one family parked across two faded lines. That's when her hand finally moved. She slid the clipboard up, flipped it open and clicked a pen like it was go time. The sound was small but sharp and anyone close enough might have noticed how deliberate it was. She started pacing off spaces with her feet, heel to toe, slow and measured like she was measuring something that mattered. She leaned down slightly to check the distance between bumpers, nodded to herself, then scribbled something down. The pen moved fast, confident like she'd done this before. She glanced up, scanned the lot again and adjusted her position to get a better angle on incoming cars. The calm around her stayed intact, but the tone shifted just enough to feel off, like when the air changes before a storm. A couple walking past exchanged a quick look, not alarmed, just confused. Someone else slowed down, watching her right, then shook their head and kept moving. Still no one said anything. The morning was too quiet, too normal, and she hadn't crossed the line yet. She was just standing there, counting, noting, building something invisible on that clipboard while everyone else was thinking about hymns and coffee. And that's when she decided church needed enforcement. She finally spoke to someone when a middle-aged guy in a navy polo stepped away from his car and turned toward the entrance, keys still in his hand. Her voice was calm at first, almost friendly, the kind of tone people use when they're pretending this is no big deal. She smiled just enough to seem polite and lifted one finger slightly, like she was asking for a quick second. The guy stopped out of habit more than curiosity, assuming maybe he dropped something or missed a sign. Nobody around them slowed down, because nothing about her approach looked aggressive or out of line yet. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask his name. She went straight into it with a soft, professional cadence, saying she just wanted to flag that his parking spot wasn't really aligned with community standards. She stressed the word aligned like it was something everyone should already understand. The guy blinked, glanced back at his car, then back at her, clearly confused but not defensive. It was church. You don't snap at people in a church parking lot. You just listen and hope it wraps up quick. She gestured vaguely toward the painted lines and talked about flow, how vehicles coming in needed to maintain order so things stayed smooth. She said consistency mattered, especially during peak times, and nodded like she was explaining basic math. The language was polished, rehearsed, and just vague enough to sound official without being specific. Anyone overhearing might have assumed she worked with the church or the city, because who else talks like that before 9 in the morning? The guy let out a quiet, "Oh," the universal sound of someone who doesn't want trouble. He shrugged and said he could move if it was an issue. She smiled wider at that, the kind of smile that reads like a small win. She told him she appreciated his cooperation and reminded him they were just trying to keep things orderly for everyone. Still no raised voice, no accusation, just calm pressure wrapped in buzzwords. He nodded again even though nothing about the situation made sense. Around them, a few people slowed their steps, not stopping but definitely listening. A woman with a purse tucked under her arm glanced from the pink blazer to the clipboard and back, eyebrows slightly raised. Another guy muttered something under his breath and kept walking. Most people brushed it off because again it was church and nobody wanted to kick off Sunday with some parking lot argument. The vibe was still mostly peaceful, just with a weird undertone creeping in. The reason she got away with it was simple. She sounded confident. She didn't rush, didn't stutter, didn't look unsure. Confidence sells authority better than any badge. Plus, she wasn't yelling or demanding. She framed it like a favor, like she was doing everyone a solid by stepping in. In a different setting, someone might have told her to mind her business, but here, politeness ruled the moment. She moved on after that, scanning the lot again like she was checking boxes in her head. A second congregant got the same treatment, then a third. Each time she repeated the idea, not the exact words but the same message. Things weren't flowing right. Order mattered. Consistency kept everyone safe. Nobody challenged her claim directly, mostly because she never fully explained it. She kept everything just abstract enough to dodge questions. Then she stopped talking altogether and went back to the clipboard. She flipped to a fresh page with purpose and started writing. The pen scratched loudly this time, not subtle, not hidden. She leaned against the hood of a nearby car without asking and filled out lines like she was issuing citations. Anyone close enough could see the way she boxed things off, underlined words and added little notes in the margins. It didn't look like casual jotting. It looked official. That's when the mood shifted for real. Writing changes everything. Talking can be dismissed as opinion. Writing feels permanent. A younger couple slowed down and stared openly now, whispering to each other as they passed. An older man stopped completely, watching her for a second before shaking his head and moving on. The bells from inside rang again, louder this time, but the piece they usually brought didn't quite land. She kept going, moving from spot to spot, occasionally glancing up to match a car to whatever she was recording. She didn't address anyone directly anymore. She didn't need to. The act itself spoke loud enough. People started wondering what exactly she was documenting and who it was supposedly for. Still, nobody stepped in. That's the thing about social pressure. Everyone waits for someone else to be the first to call it out. A volunteer near the entrance noticed now, watching her with a furrowed brow but staying put. Ushers exchanged looks but didn't move yet. From their perspective, she hadn't disrupted the service, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't done anything blatantly confrontational. She was just a woman with a clipboard and oddly enough, that still carried weight. She paused, looked up at a cluster of cars parked slightly crooked, and sighed loudly enough for nearby people to hear. Then she wrote faster, pressing the pen harder into the paper. Her posture stiffened, her jaw tightened, and the friendly tone from earlier was gone. Whatever pretense of quiet assistance she'd been using started to slip. But then she stopped whispering. Her voice carried farther now, no longer tucked into polite side conversations but aimed outward like she wanted witnesses. She pointed at a dark SUV near the curb and said plainly, that vehicle didn't belong on church property. Not might be an issue, not could cause confusion, but didn't belong, full stop. Heads turned fast this time. The owner froze halfway through locking the door, eyebrows jumping like he'd misheard her. She didn't repeat herself, just stared at him expectantly, pen hovering above the clipboard like a loaded question. When he asked what she meant, she shifted tactics without missing a beat. She explained that certain vehicles disrupted the balance of the lot and created inconsistencies that weren't acceptable during organized gatherings. Her words were smoother than her message, and she kept her tone even, like she was stating policy instead of opinion. It sounded official enough to stall people, and that pause was all she needed to press forward. She motioned with her pen toward an open area farther down and told him to relocate. That broke the seal. Another driver chimed in, asking why their truck was suddenly a problem when it had been parked there every Sunday for years. She answered without looking rattled, saying long-standing habits didn't override standards, especially when safety and structure were involved. She said it like she was quoting something written down somewhere important. The guy scoffed but didn't push back, glancing around like he was checking whether anyone else planned to say something. She moved fast after that, scanning the lot and calling out cars by color and shape instead of license plates. A red sedan. A white pickup. A compact parked too close to the walkway. Each time the claim stayed the same but landed heavier. Those vehicles didn't belong there. People needed to move them now. She didn't ask. She directed. Her confidence ramped up with every step, and the clipboard stayed front and center like a badge she didn't need to flash. Ushers near the entrance definitely noticed now. One of them leaned toward another and whispered, eyes locked on the pink blazer. They didn't intervene yet though. From their angle, she was still technically outside, still not blocking the doors, still not shouting. Church culture teaches patience and they were exercising it hard. But their body language shifted. Arms crossed. Smiles gone. Attention fixed. Phones came out quietly, not raised high, just angled enough to capture what was happening. Nobody announced they were recording. They didn't need to. The shift in energy said it all. People sensed this was sliding into something they'd want proof of later. A few congregants exchanged looks that said, "Is this for real?" while others shook their heads and muttered under their breath. She noticed the phones and didn't flinch. If anything, it seemed to juice her up. She squared her shoulders and spoke louder, projecting like she wanted the whole lot to hear. She said compliance was expected and that ignoring direction would be noted. The word noted landed hard, like it carried consequences nobody had signed up for. A couple of people actually moved their cars, more out of discomfort than agreement, just wanting the situation to end. That's when she crossed another line. She said she'd be documenting non-compliance for follow-up. She didn't explain what that meant or who would follow up, and that vagueness made it worse. She tapped the clipboard with her pen for emphasis, letting the sound cut through the murmurs. The idea that this wasn't just talk anymore, that names or plates might be written down, changed the math for everyone watching. A man near the edge of the lot laughed nervously and said she couldn't be serious. She looked straight at him and said she absolutely was. No smile. No soft tone. Just a flat delivery that shut him up quick. She wrote something down immediately after, eyes never leaving him, like she was daring him to say more. He didn't. People started backing away from her orbit, giving her space like it was contagious. The calm Sunday vibe was gone now, replaced with that awkward tension where nobody wants to escalate but nobody feels okay either. Kids were pulled closer. Conversations dropped to whispers. The bells rang again inside, but out here it felt like time stalled. She paced slowly, surveying her domain like she owned it, stopping occasionally to jot more notes. Each scratch of the pen sounded louder than the last. Ushers took a step forward, then stopped, clearly debating their move. They hadn't been trained for this kind of nonsense and it showed. The hesitation only emboldened her. One woman finally asked who she reported to. That question hung in the air heavy. For a split second it looked like the pink blazer might crack. Instead, she said that wasn't something she needed to explain right now. She said procedures were in place and people would be informed later. It was a non-answer, but it came out sharp enough to discourage follow-ups. That's when it clicked for the crowd. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a well-meaning volunteer gone rogue. This was someone trying to assert control where she didn't have it and doing it boldly. The realization spread fast, moving through the lot like a ripple. Faces hardened. Tolerance thinned. A few people squared their shoulders like they were ready to speak up. And that's when people realized she was serious. She shifted her focus from the cars to the people, and that was when things took a turn nobody could ignore anymore. Instead of standing back by the parking rows, she walked straight toward the entrance, heels clicking sharp against the pavement. Her eyes locked onto the narrow stretch where folks naturally funneled in, and she shook her head like she just spotted a mess she was tired of tolerating. Without asking anyone a thing, she announced that the access routes were being blocked and needed immediate correction. She didn't explain what routes she meant, because she didn't have to in her mind. She swept her arm across the walkway, palm flat, directing traffic like she'd been doing it for years. People stopped mid-step, confused, glancing down at the ground like maybe they were standing somewhere illegal. She told a couple to move to the right, then waved another family left, creating a weird zigzag where there hadn't been a problem seconds earlier. The confidence in her movements made it feel like this was suddenly her space to manage. A greeter at the door was in the middle of welcoming a familiar face when Karen stepped right into the moment, cutting between them and pointing to the side. The greeting died awkwardly in the air. The congregant blinked, then laughed nervously, not sure if this was some kind of joke. Karen didn't laugh back. She said entrances needed to stay clear and repeated the phrase access routes like it carried legal weight. The greeter froze, hands still half raised, completely thrown off. That interruption rippled outward fast. Conversations stuttered. Smiles faded. People who'd been chatting quietly stopped altogether, unsure where they were supposed to stand now. Karen paced back and forth near the doors, correcting imaginary problems, tapping the clipboard every time someone paused too long. She pointed at a stroller and told the parents to shift it back a few feet. She waved off a group waiting for friends, saying they couldn't cluster there. Each instruction landed heavier than the last, not because it made sense, but because it was happening at the literal front door of the church. Congregants started showing real discomfort now. Shoulders tensed. Brows furrowed. A few people glanced inside like they were checking whether anyone official was seeing this unfold. It felt wrong in a way that was hard to articulate, like someone rearranging furniture in your house without asking. This wasn't the parking lot anymore. This was the threshold, the place that belonged to the church itself, and she was acting like it was her personal zone. She kept gesturing, more sharply now, less patient. Her directions overlapped, sending one person into another's path, then correcting them again. Someone muttered that this was ridiculous, and she shot them a look that shut it down instantly. The clipboard stayed tucked against her side, but the pen was out, clicking again, loud and pointed. Every sound she made felt intentional, like she wanted eyes on her. Then her voice rose. Not a scream, but loud enough to cut through the low hum of conversation. She said people needed to stop blocking access routes and follow direction immediately. The word immediately rang out, echoing off the building. Heads snapped toward her. Inside voices were expected here, even outside. That volume crossed a line and everyone felt it. A couple of ushers finally stepped closer, concern written all over their faces. They exchanged quick glances, silently asking who was going to handle this. Still they hesitated. She hadn't sworn. She hadn't touched anyone. She was just loud, assertive, and deeply out of place. Church manners held them back like an invisible leash. Karen noticed the attention and leaned into it. She raised her voice again, louder this time, repeating that access routes had to remain clear for safety reasons. She spoke slower, like she was addressing people who weren't very bright. The condescension landed hard. A few congregants bristled. One guy shook his head and whispered, "No way," under his breath. Phones angled higher now, no longer subtle. She pointed toward the doors and told people to keep moving, no stopping, no lingering. The irony was thick. She was the one causing the bottleneck, the one breaking the flow she claimed to care about. But logic wasn't driving this anymore. Control was. She planted herself dead center and acted like the obstacle she accused everyone else of being. That's when the mood fully flipped. Politeness drained out of the space, replaced by a tight, uncomfortable silence between her commands. The bells inside finished their ring, and the doors opened briefly as someone stepped out, only to stop short when they saw what was happening. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy asserting a version of order that existed only in her head. She raised her voice one more time, sharper than before, telling everyone this was their final warning to comply. That sentence hung heavy, absurd and threatening all at once. It was the kind of thing that made people look around for an adult in the room, someone who could shut this down clean. From the steps just beyond the doorway, a figure paused, watching quietly. He hadn't been paying attention before, but now he was. And that's when the pastor noticed. She squared herself near the entrance like she was bracing for impact, lifting her chin and tightening her grip on the clipboard. The hesitation around her seemed to irritate something deep, because she suddenly leaned into the moment instead of backing down. She announced, louder than before, that if this situation continued, she would be forced to report the church. The word report landed heavy, like it came with invisible paperwork and consequences nobody had asked for. A few people audibly scoffed while others stiffened, stunned she'd even say that out loud here. She kept going without waiting for a response, explaining that unregulated movement created liability issues. She stretched the phrase out, stressing each syllable like she'd memorized it from a seminar. She talked about potential injuries, blocked access, and exposure risks, even though nobody had tripped or complained. The logic felt borrowed, like she was stacking buzzwords to build authority from thin air. People glanced around, half expecting hidden cameras or a punchline that never came. She framed it all as concern, claiming she was protecting everyone involved. Her voice softened for half a second, adopting that fake care tone that sounded rehearsed. She said she didn't want anyone getting hurt, didn't want the church facing problems later, didn't want things getting out of hand. The irony hit hard. She was the only reason anything felt out of hand at all. Still, she nodded to herself like she'd just delivered a public service announcement. Ushers stepped closer now, close enough that she definitely noticed. One of them raised a hand slightly as if about to speak, then paused. Church training kicked in again. De-escalate. Stay calm. Don't create a scene. They exchanged quick looks, silently asking if this was the moment. Karen took that pause as permission. She shifted her stance, planting her feet wider, owning the space. She said she was documenting everything and that leadership would be notified. She didn't specify whose leadership because she didn't have to. Vague threats are powerful when people don't want confrontation. A woman near the door whispered that this was ridiculous, and Karen shot back that ridicule wouldn't change accountability. Her tone sharpened, losing any trace of friendliness. The pen clicked again, fast and loud, punctuating the tension. Phones were no longer hidden. A couple were fully raised now, screens glowing. Karen noticed and smirked, like she'd just gained an audience instead of exposure. She said it was good people were recording, that transparency mattered. That comment drew murmurs and head shakes. Someone muttered that she was out of her mind. Another person laughed nervously, then stopped when nobody else joined in. She leaned toward the nearest usher and said they needed to cooperate before things escalated further. The audacity of telling church staff how to behave on their own property hung thick in the air. The usher opened his mouth, then closed it again, jaw tight. He wasn't scared. He was calculating. This wasn't worth blowing up the morning yet, but it was getting close. Karen wasn't done. She said she'd already noted multiple violations and that continued resistance would reflect poorly. The implication was clear. There would be consequences somewhere, somehow. She didn't raise her voice this time. She lowered it, which somehow felt worse. People leaned in unintentionally, hanging on every word, disbelief mixing with anger. A man near the steps finally asked who exactly she thought she was. The question cut through the space like a blade. Karen straightened instantly and declared she was an HOA board member from the neighboring subdivision. She said it proudly, like it explained everything. A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. Oh, here. On church grounds. The absurdity landed all at once. She doubled down instead of retreating, saying proximity mattered and standards extended beyond fences. She insisted that communities had a responsibility to uphold order wherever they intersected. The logic twisted in on itself, but she spoke it with conviction, like she believed saying it firmly enough would make it true. Ushers stepped fully into view now, ready but restrained, eyes locked on her. That was the last claim she made. The final stretch of fake authority, fully exposed and wildly out of bounds. The space felt different afterward, like a switch had flipped. Politeness evaporated. Tolerance snapped. People weren't confused anymore. They were done pretending this was normal. That's when pretending she mattered stopped being an option. The shift was subtle at first, almost easy to miss if you weren't watching the steps. The pastor didn't rush out or raise his voice or make some big dramatic entrance. He simply stepped forward, hands relaxed at his sides, posture calm, like he'd walked into situations far more intense than this and knew panic never helped. His presence alone changed the temperature. Conversations died off. Phones lowered just a bit. Even Karen paused, though she clearly didn't plan to for long. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough to be heard without competing, and looked around briefly at the gathered congregants. There was no anger in his face, no irritation, just a steady focus that carried weight without effort. When he spoke, his voice was even, grounded, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. He asked one simple question, clear and direct, without sarcasm or edge. He asked if she attended this church. The question hung there, awkward and unavoidable. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting it. For a split second it looked like she might deflect, but she didn't. She lifted her chin and answered honestly, saying she did not attend there. She explained she was an HOA board member from a nearby subdivision, like that detail alone justified everything she'd been doing. She said it confidently, like she'd just played her trump card. The pastor nodded once, slowly, as if that confirmed exactly what he needed to know. He didn't interrupt her, didn't challenge her mid-sentence. He waited until she finished speaking, then responded with the same calm tone, steady and unmistakable. He said this was church property. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't repeat it. He stated it like a fact nobody could argue with because nobody could. He went on, explaining that the grounds were private religious space, governed by the church, not by any outside organization. His words were plain, not wrapped in legal jargon, not softened by politeness either. He wasn't debating her. He was informing her. He made it clear that whatever authority she held elsewhere did not apply here, not even a little. People nodded. Some exhaled. The tension that had been building finally had a release point. This was the voice everyone had been subconsciously waiting for. He didn't accuse her of bad intentions or insult her behavior. He simply removed the foundation she was standing on. No authority. No jurisdiction. No role. Karen didn't like that. You could see it in the way her jaw tightened and her grip on the clipboard shifted. She tried to push back, saying she was only concerned about safety and order. She claimed that overlapping communities had shared responsibilities and that her involvement was preventative, not intrusive. Her words came out faster now, stacked one on top of the other like she was scrambling to rebuild ground that had just vanished. The pastor listened, still calm, still composed. When she paused, he responded again, explaining that safety on church property was handled by church leadership and designated staff. He said outside enforcement was neither requested nor permitted. His tone never changed, but the boundary was unmistakable. This conversation was not open-ended. Karen argued anyway. She insisted that liability didn't stop at property lines and that someone had to take initiative when others failed to act. She gestured around like she was pointing to evidence of chaos, even though people were now standing quietly watching. The irony didn't slow her down. She spoke louder, sharper, trying to reclaim momentum. That's when the crowd's mood fully flipped in the pastor's favor. People who'd been tense now looked relieved. A few nodded openly. One guy folded his arms and leaned back, like he'd just settled into his seat for the show. Ushers relaxed slightly, ready but no longer unsure. The authority question had been answered, and it wasn't in her favor. The pastor didn't raise his voice or interrupt her rant. He waited until she finished again, then spoke with more firmness, not anger, but finality. He repeated that she had zero authority there. He didn't embellish it. He didn't argue the point. He closed it. The clarity of it landed harder than shouting ever could. Karen scoffed, shaking her head, muttering that this kind of attitude was exactly how problems escalated. She accused him of dismissing legitimate concerns and said she would note his refusal to cooperate. The clipboard came up again, pen ready, like she was clinging to the last symbol of power she had left. The pastor took one step closer, still measured, still calm. He didn't touch her or threaten her. He simply held eye contact and said that continuing to interfere would not be allowed. The words were simple, but the implication was heavy. This was no longer a discussion. It was a line. Karen opened her mouth to argue again, clearly not ready to accept the loss. She started forming another sentence, another justification, another stretch of authority that didn't exist. Her confidence tipped into defiance and the crowd felt it. Phones lifted again. Ushers shifted their weight. The moment tightened like a drawn wire. And that was the mistake. The pastor didn't raise his voice or change his expression when he spoke again, and that somehow made the words land heavier. He told her, clearly and calmly, that she needed to leave the property immediately. Not later, not after another explanation, not once she finished writing whatever she thought she was writing. No. His tone wasn't angry or smug, just firm in a way that didn't invite negotiation. It was the kind of statement that ends conversations instead of continuing them. He explained it publicly but with respect, turning slightly so everyone nearby could hear without it sounding like a spectacle. He said the church welcomed guests, but it did not tolerate outside interference or unauthorized enforcement. He emphasized that the space was meant for worship and community, not confrontation. Every word was measured, careful, and impossible to twist. There was no insult in it, no lecture, just a boundary drawn clean and straight. Karen tried to interrupt, but he didn't stop speaking. He kept going, stating that her presence had disrupted the service environment and that continuing to remain on the property would be considered refusal to comply with a direct request. The phrasing was polite but official enough to matter. It was the first time someone had spoken to her in language that carried real weight, and it showed. The effect on the crowd was instant. Shoulders dropped. Faces softened. A low exhale rippled through the group like everyone had been holding their breath at the same time. People who'd been tense moments earlier relaxed. some even chuckling quietly in disbelief. The stress that had clung to the morning just evaporated, replaced with that familiar church calm everyone had been robbed of earlier. Ushers stepped forward together now, not rushing, not aggressive, just present. Their body language was supportive, aligned with the pastor, and unmistakable. They didn't touch her yet. They didn't need to. Their proximity alone made the situation clear. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was procedure. Karen stood frozen for a beat, clearly stunned that it had gone this far. She looked around like she was expecting backup or at least sympathy and found none. Eyes that had once been confused were now steady. No one was buying what she'd been selling. The clipboard trembled slightly in her hand, though she tried to steady it. She muttered something under her breath about overreach and unfair treatment, but it didn't carry. The pastor waited, patient as ever, giving her a moment to comply without forcing it. When she didn't move, one usher gently gestured toward the parking lot entrance, the direction unmistakable. Still no hands, no raised voices, just quiet authority doing its job. That's when it finally clicked for her. She huffed, snapped the clipboard shut, and turned sharply on her heel. The motion was dramatic, but the impact was gone. Whatever power she thought she had evaporated the moment she was told to leave. She marched away with stiff steps, muttering complaints to no one, the pink blazer now less official and more ridiculous with every stride. The ushers walked with her, not crowding, just making sure the direction stayed clear. People parted naturally, creating a path that hadn't existed minutes earlier. No one said a word. No one laughed. No one clapped. The silence did more damage than any reaction could have. It stripped the moment of drama and left only consequence. As she crossed the edge of the lot, the pastor spoke once more, telling her she was no longer welcome on church property that morning. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. He wished her a good day and turned back toward the entrance without another glance. The dismissal was complete. Karen hesitated at the boundary like she might turn back, like one more argument could change things. It didn't. The ushers stopped with her, waited, and watched until she continued off the property entirely. The moment she stepped beyond the line, the situation was over. Irreversible. Done. The doors opened again and congregants resumed moving inside. Conversations restarted, softer this time, tinged with disbelief and relief. Kids tugged on parents' hands. Greeters smiled again, a little shaken but back in rhythm. The bells rang once more, and this time the sound felt right. No one followed Karen. No one filmed her exit. The story had ended where it needed to. The authority had spoken, the disruption had been removed, and the space reclaimed itself. People took their seats, still processing, but calm returned like it had never left. But the silence afterward said everything. The doors closed gently behind the last few people, and the shift back to normal happened almost immediately, like the space itself exhaled. The tension that had been hanging around just drained away, replaced by familiar sounds and motions everyone recognized. Shoes scuffed softly against the floor. Coats were shrugged off and folded over arms. Conversations dropped into low, respectful murmurs instead of sharp whispers. Whatever weird energy had followed the morning around finally lost its grip. The bells rang again, clear and steady, echoing through the building the way they were supposed to. Not rushed. Not drowned out by raised voices. Just a clean reminder that it was time to settle in. People took their usual paths down the aisles, some still shaking their heads like they couldn't believe what had gone down outside. A few shared quick looks that said, "Did that really just happen?" followed by half smiles and quiet laughs. The absurdity of it all landed now that it was over. Ushers returned to their posts like nothing had been out of the ordinary, smoothing programs, guiding late arrivals, and offering nods of reassurance. Their shoulders looked lighter, their movements easier. The pastor moved back toward the front without any drama, picking up exactly where the morning had been interrupted. No speeches about respect. No reminders about behavior. He didn't need to. The point had already been made, loud and clear, without ever being shouted. Kids fidgeted in the pews, parents leaned in to quiet them, and the soft hum of a congregation settling into place filled the room. Someone dropped a hymnal and whispered an apology. Another person laughed quietly and waved it off. These small, ordinary moments stitched the morning back together, each one reinforcing that the disruption was gone and not coming back. Outside, the parking lot sat still. Cars were parked the same way they always had been, crooked lines and all, untouched by imaginary standards or clipboard math. No pink blazer. No pacing. No pen clicking. The space looked exactly like it should have from the start, empty of authority cosplay and full of calm. Anyone pulling in late had no idea anything strange had happened, and honestly that was the best possible outcome. Inside, the opening hymn began, voices rising together, slightly uneven but genuine. The sound filled the room, pushing out the last lingering edge of the morning's nonsense. People sang a little louder than usual, not out of rebellion but out of relief. It felt good to be back in something familiar, something real, after watching someone try to hijack it with fake power. A few congregants exchanged knowing glances during the song, the kind that carry shared experience without needing explanation. They didn't dwell on it. There was no replaying the scene or whispering commentary anymore. The situation had been handled, and dwelling on it would have just dragged it back into a space it no longer belonged. The pastor spoke again, welcoming everyone and moving into the service like nothing had derailed it. His tone was warm, steady, and completely normal. That normalcy mattered more than anything else. It signaled that the morning hadn't been stolen, that no outsider got to leave a mark just by showing up loud and confident. People settled into listening mode, phones tucked away, attention forward. The strange adrenaline from earlier faded, replaced by the rhythm of the service. Even those who'd been closest to the confrontation seemed calmer now, shoulders loose, breathing steady. The building felt like itself again. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered a quick recap to a latecomer who widened their eyes and mouthed, "No way," before shrugging and sitting down. That was it. No outrage spiral. No ongoing drama. Just a wild story already sliding into you won't believe this territory, safely contained in the past. Karen was completely gone. Not lurking. Not arguing. Not waiting for the last word. Gone in the most effective way possible, which was being made irrelevant. No one chased her. No one mocked her. The space didn't need that. Her absence was enough. As the service continued, the morning found its footing again, steady and unbothered. Whatever control she tried to force onto the place never stuck. Faith, routine, and quiet authority had done what they always did. They outlasted noise. She tried enforcing HOA rules in a church, and learned even a clipboard answers to faith, not fear.